Those were ads.
All right, young scholars. So I only graded a couple of the homework number twos on Saturday because a number of people were still having issues with getting Excel and all that. So I'm going to make sure to grade the ones that I had not graded on Saturday at some point later today. So if you do not have a grade for homework number two just yet, that is the reason why. Hopefully at this point now, everybody has access to Microsoft Office Excel through the free download that you should have access to through your Bloomfield account. So today we're going to go through VLOOKUP, some interesting formulas that we're going to go through multiple times between now and the midterm, but just to give you some, I guess, introduction to the VLOOKUP, as well as some of these other formulas, and a review of payment and in order functions, and an introduction to the concatenate function as well, and some of the string functions that you guys will see next week too. Then we're going to go into the muffins example, which is a little more advanced than the two previous homeworks we've done. So that's why we're going to touch on it today. And you'll see, and I'll touch on momentarily when we finish up that, how it compares to the Excel homework 3. So first, go ahead and download this VLOOKUP file by clicking the three dots and selecting Download Original File. You should open a workbook called VLOOKUP that looks like this with multiple different worksheets inside. And make sure you have the VLOOKUP exact match workbook, or worksheet rather, opened first within that workbook. And there's 5 worksheets within here that we'll talk through. Like I said, 3 of them are going to be new to you, and 2 of them will be somewhat of a review. But the idea is just to go over some formulas that we'll touch on, like I said, multiple times between now and the midterm. So there are 2 different types of VLOOKUP. One is called an exact match, and one is called a nearest match. So the V in VLOOKUP simply stands for vertical. It's looking vertically. So within the VLOOKUP formula, you'll notice that it looks something like this. The first parameter is always going to be whatever you're looking up. So in this instance, it's B20. We're looking up car loan, our payment type. The next parameter is going to be our table range, which in this instance is A6 through E10. So notice here, the table does not include any of the headers. So payment type, rate, none of that is included. So it's just credit card through $10.30. So we make them an absolute so that when we auto fill over, we don't have to worry about that change. The third parameter, you'll see here the number 5. The third parameter is the number of columns in that table that we need to use, not necessarily how many there are, but how many that we need to use. In this instance, since we're looking for payment, we need to use all 5 of the columns since payment is the last column. And then the last parameter depends on whether or not you're using an exact or nearest match. With an exact match, your last parameter is either going to be a 0 or a false. So for exact, the last parameter is either a 0 or a false. You'll notice here, you're asked to do the other 4 for this VLOOKUP, and I'll show you exactly how to do that. So we do equals VLOOKUP, open parenthesis. We select what we're looking for. Credit card, cell D20, comma. We highlight our table range. We make it an absolute. Comma. Since we're looking for the payment, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, payments in the 5th column. We need 5 columns to use, comma. And then since it's an exact match, we can either type the word false or put in a 0. And then close parentheses. And if you did it correctly, you should have the exact same number as below, highlighted in yellow. And then in format, you can click back in, right-click, select Format Cells, and either select Currency or Accounting to get that number, 722.37. Click back in, autofill across. So that all of these numbers match from the table. Credit card matches, student loan matches, mortgage matches, personal loan matches, etc. So all it is doing is looking into the table. All right, what is the payment listed here for that payment type? If we were looking for the interest rate, we would only use 2 columns to find the interest rate. So instead of that 5, we would put 2. And again, you'll see this multiple times before the midterm. But the primary thing you want to see with an exact VLOOKUP is that there's an exact piece of information you can find. Okay, I can find a payment. I can find a present value. I can find an interest rate. Whereas with VLOOKUP nearest match, there's just a range. And you guys saw this last week with the insurance payments with the motorcycles. With nearest match, there'll be something like that. So you'll see everything is the same with nearest match. The first parameter is what you're looking up. Second parameter is your range of the table. The third parameter is how many columns you're using. So in this case, we're looking for price. So we only need to use the first two columns. That last column with total is completely useless to us. So we only need the first two columns. And then with the nearest match, instead of a 0 or false, it's a 1 or a true. So we'll see the example here. If we do a VLOOKUP, open parenthesis, we select E18 to look up 5. We select our entire table, even though we're only going to use the first two columns, comma 2, comma, because it's the nearest match, we either do 1 or true. And if you put it in correctly, you should have 20 for the $20. And if you autofill it across, all of them should reflect the dollar amounts highlighted in yellow. So you'll notice here, for example, 160 is actually closer to 200 than 100, but it still gives you $13. That's because it will refer back down to the previous amount if it does not go over. So for example, 89 is closer to 100 than 50, but it still says 16. 150 is 16. So it defaults back down to the previous amount because it did not go over the next amount. Even though you would think that because it's closer to another amount, that's why it's called nearest match. It's not necessarily the best match available. So this is what we would have used with respect to what we saw with the insurance last week. And what you could technically use, if you so were inclined, with the ingredients you'll see today with the make or buy analysis. So again, we'll cover VLOOKUP again multiple times as well. Now we'll review and or functions, which we covered last week as well. So in column E, we have an and function, which is checking to determine whether or not the numbers in column B are greater than or equal to 6. So in every case where that's true, the value says true. In every instance where that's false, such as 1, 2, etc., it says false. So in this example, I only have one and being checked here. Most of the time, you're going to have 2, 3, 4, etc. Same thing in column H. It's only checking to see if the numbers in column G are equal to 9. Obviously, the only one that will be true is where the number 9 is. In column I, I'm checking to see which numbers are less than 3. Obviously, only 1 and 2 will meet that parameter. And then in column J, we're checking to see which ones are greater than 8. Obviously, only 9 and 10 will meet that. And the last two here, K and L, are using the OR function, which checks one or the other. So in column K, it's checking whether or not the numbers in column G are greater than 1 or less than 6. Every one of them, except for 1, is greater than 1. So 9 out of the 10 will have true. And 1 is less than 6. So all of them are true. Whereas in the last column, we're checking to see if any of them are greater than 11, which none of them are, or if any of them are less than 3, which 1 and 2 are. So only those two cases are true. And you'll notice that by default, just like with an if, you don't necessarily have to put in true or false as the true or false declarations. If you wanted to make them something different, like we did with superior, not superior, you can go ahead and do that. So hopefully that is a review from last week. Now on to concatenate. This we're going to cover next week, I believe, when we go into our discussion and tutorials on modifying and taking information out of strings. So you may have had a programming class where you learned concatenate. It's basically just combining two strings, adding them together. There's two different ways you could do it. You could do it by selecting a cell and then ampersand another cell. So in this case, we have E1, hello, how are you? Ampersand C13, Bob is now 90 years old. It simply just adds the two of them together to give a long string. The other way to do it is using the concat function or concatenate function, which would be equals concat, and then whichever cells you're combining, separated by commas. More often than not, people tend to use this formula because it's simpler to write out. But when you're modifying strings, there's three common formulas you want to use. The first one is the left function, which takes the farmost left piece of text from a cell. So in this instance, we have Bob. So we do equals left, cell A1, comma 3. So we took the first three letters from cell A1 from the left-hand side. That's all this does. Left, cell A1, comma, 3 letters. Then the right is the opposite. So right, cell C1, comma, 7. That means starting from the left-hand or the right-hand side instead of the left-hand side, we take 7 letters. So the right function takes the farmost right piece of the text from the selected cell and starts there. Now, if you wanted to do from the middle, you would use the mid function. It extracts a subset of text from a specific file based on your request. The first parameter is always that cell that you're using or selecting, comma, instead of with left and right, where you're selecting how many letters, with the mid function, you're selecting first, where are you going to start? And then secondly, where are you going to finish? So in this instance, I just made it easy. I did start from the beginning, finish at the end. But usually, you're going to start somewhere in the middle and end somewhere in the middle, because that's the whole point of using the mid function. Otherwise, you'd use the left and start from the left or start from the right. And again, like I said, we'll go through that more in depth next week when we cover the strings exercises. And then last but not least here is PMT and count. You'll notice here in cell A1, we have a reminder of the PMT or payment function. You should remember from last week, the first parameter here is your interest rate, in this case, 16%. The second parameter here is your number of payments, which is 15 in this instance. And the last parameter is your present value, in this instance, $1,500. So here, B1, B2, and B3, I'm simply showing you alignments. So Bob Dole here is aligned on the left. Ross Perot is aligned here in the middle, and Bill Nye the Science Guy is aligned to the right. And here in B7 and B8, I'm showing you true or false. In B7, it says if B2 equals Ross Perot, true or false? Well, it's true because B2 has Ross Perot. As I mentioned, with the if statements, you don't have to put true or false there. They're there by default. So I put them there just to show you. And then in B8, we're asked if B3 has Bob Dole, true or false. Well, it's false. Bill Nye the Science Guy is there. And again, those are just there for your benefit. You would not necessarily have to type them there because Excel has that by default. You would only type true or false parameters if you wanted to, like we did with the superior, not superior last week. So here in column F, we have this new function you probably haven't seen before that says rand between parenthesis 1, 100. So all that is doing is returning a random number between 1 and 100. And I just did that because if you scroll down, you'll see count function, sum function, average function, min function, max. I just wanted to show you specifically how you would do those. So all the count function does is you would select your range of numbers, and it simply counts how many numbers there are. The sum function obviously adds all of them together. The average function adds them all together and then divides by how many numbers there are. So that 1,300 divided by 25 gives us a nice round 52. The min function just gives us whatever the minimum number is. So if you went in and pressed enter on any of these numbers, it would go ahead and change all the numbers because of the rand in between function. So the minimum now changed from 13 to 6. The maximum now changed to 99. All the max is the highest number. And again, we'll work with these formulas in the future as well. So that's just a basic review of some of those formulas. Like I said, the main point was to introduce you to the VLOOKUP there. So now we're going to jump into this muffins. So go ahead, back on the Blackboard, click on the muffins, click the 3 dots, download original file. And while you're opening that, I'm going to read off the assumptions in the file here. So you're deciding whether or not to go into the business of selling muffins. You're going to determine whether or not you should buy or make them yourselves. This spreadsheet will help you determine which alternative you would like to choose. It takes 30 ounces of ingredients to make one muffin. However, when you buy in bulk, you receive discounts described below. So you have the 30 here to represent the 30 ounces. Then you have a table here. This would be a VLOOKUP nearest match. If you were to have this on the exam, for instance, it would just have the first number. So 1, 150,001, 300,001, 450,001, 600,001. Labor costs you $15 an hour. It takes 1 minute to make one muffin. So we have the 15 here, and we also have the 15 here, and we have 60 here because it takes 1 minute to make one muffin. So there's 60 minutes in an hour, 60 muffins. You're going to need to purchase equipment for this venture. So you decide to buy 20 muffin trays at $9 each. 29. Additionally, you decide to buy a new oven, mixer, and cooling wraps using your Home Depot credit card. The oven, $11,000. The mixer, $399. Cooling wraps, $1,000. $11,000, $399, $1,000. Pay off the Home Depot card in 1 year with 12 payments at 23%. 12 and 23. However, regardless of how many muffins you make, add the cost of 1 month of loan payments, i.e. 13 instead of 12. So we have the 13 there. I did that because a baker's dozen is 13 instead of 12. They do that because they make 13 instead of 12 in case they mess something up. So next we have, it costs you 50 cents for each muffin you buy if you order less than 10,000, and 35 cents for each muffin if you buy more than 10,000. The bakery charges you 7 cents for tax on each muffin up until $1,000. If you produce more than $1,000, it's just a flat tax of $1,000. And then lastly, you're charged 25 cents per muffin if you order less than 12,000 muffins, and 15 cents if you're over 12,000. So 12,000 here, 25 cents, 15 cents there. So ideally, you order something in bulk, you have a discount. So hopefully everybody has that up and loaded and ready to go. So the first thing we need to compute is the cost of our ingredients. So first we do equals, open parenthesis. We select our 30 ounces here, and we multiply it by B2, our 50,000 muffins we're creating. Then we make our N22 an absolute, because the 30 ounces doesn't change for any of them. It's always 30 ounces. So we click enter, and we autofill across. However, this is not an amount of money. It is our amount of ounces. So we have to scroll down a little to check our cost here. So for the first one, we have 150,000 ounces. So that's in the first range here. So our cost per ounce is going to be the 3 cents. So we added this formula now, multiply by that 3 cents. So it's D24. And now we have the cost of our ingredients of $4,500. Then we have the next one, which is 450,000 ounces. So you have to scroll down a little more, and we see that that is now in the 2 cents range here. So we multiply by our 2 cents, which is D26. And now we see that our ingredient cost there is $9,000. So next we have 750,000 ounces. So we see here, oh, it's over 600,001, and the last one is 2. So they're both going to be 1 cent. So we multiply by D28, and we get 7,500. We go over to E3, and we multiply that one by D28 as well. And it's twice as much because we have twice as much muffins, the same price. You could see why using VLOOKUP might be a little easier than just simply kind of eyeballing to see what you need to do. So next, we're going to calculate our labor cost. So we will do equals our $15 per hour. However, it's the same pay for everybody, no matter how many muffins we make. So we make that an absolute, multiplied by our number of muffins, divided by how many muffins we make in an hour. And that is also an absolute. That doesn't change. The only thing in this formula that's going to change is how many muffins we're making. And since this goes across, our formula is going to work perfectly for us. You'll see down here when we go make or buy, when we autofill down, since everything else is going across, that we will have to fix up down here. But when we hit enter here, $12.50 is our labor cost for 5,000 muffins. We click back in the cell, autofill across, and obviously, the more muffins you make, the more it costs you. So now click in a cell B6. And this formula is very easy. Equals, minus, then select B5. Click back in the cell, autofill across. So when we do the payment function here for equipment, it's going to give us a negative number. By having this here, negative B5, a negative times a negative gives us a positive number. So the total, you'll see here, adds B3, B4, and B6, adds all of the positive numbers together to give us our total costs. So the equipment is a payment function. And it will be the same for every one of these. Because no matter how many muffins you make, you're buying all of this equipment. So the first function, or the first parameter rather, is our interest rate, which is that 23 cents or 23% we have in N35. We make it an absolute. It doesn't change. Comma. Our next parameter is our number of payments, which is the 13 here. Remember, baker's dozen, you added 1 to 12. So it's absolute of M36. Now, our present value is where we have a lot going on. We have to add all of our costs. So we select the 11,000 for the oven, plus the 399 for the mixer, plus the 1,000 for the cooling racks, plus inside parenthesis, the 20 muffin trays, times the $9 they cost, close parenthesis for the payment function. But for all of them, we have to add absolutes as well, because as I said, this formula is the same for all 4 instances. So again, the interest rate, number of payments, these 3 costs here, plus the 20 trays times the $9. When you hit enter, you get negative $3,103.60. And you autofill that across. All of them are negative. Below it turns them to positive, so they can be added to the total so we know all of the total costs. And that is how you compute how to make the muffins based on the assumptions you've been given. Now we're going to determine our buy costs. So first is the purchase price. So we go back down here to these assumptions here. We have two different potentials. So we're going to use an ifs function for this purchase price here. So the 10,000, 50 cents or 35 cents. So we have two possible conditions. So we use ifs. So ifs H2 is less than 10,000, then H2 is going to be multiplied by the 50 cents. And we make that an absolute. Now you could have put 10,000 over here as an absolute as well and referred to that instead of typing in 10,000, perfectly fine. And then we do the opposite. If H2 greater than 10,000, then H2 is multiplied by the 35 cents. And we make that an absolute. So this way, when we autofill over, only the H2s change. So in our first instance, we have 2,500, and we autofill across. The more muffins you purchase, obviously, the higher the cost. So next, with the tax, it says 7 cents on each muffin up until 1,000. If it's more than 1,000, it's just a flat tax of 1,000. So the max is 1,000. So there's two possible ways you could do this. You could do equals H2 times 7 cents, and then just drag that over and up. Okay, all the other ones are over 1,000. So you just change them all to 1,000. Or you could do it the way in which it's not going to require you to do more work. You could do an if function. If H2 times 7 cents greater than 1,000, comma, 1,000. Otherwise, H2 times 7 cents. So what that tells us is if that number of muffins times the tax is greater than 1,000, simply have it be 1,000. Otherwise, actually multiply it by the 7 cents. So it should give us the $350 again. And it does. And then when we autofill it across, it gives us 1,000 for the other ones as well, without us having to go in and actually delete what's actually there and typing in the number 1,000. So ideally, you want to do the second option using the if function, just so you get used to using functions, and it'll make it easier when you do the homework. The next thing we have to compute is storage, which, just like our purchase, has two different options here. 25 cents if you have less than 12,000 muffins, 15 cents if you're over 12,000. So since there's two potential conditions, again, we're going to use ifs. So if that's less than our 12,000, make it an absolute. We multiply it by the more expensive price as an absolute. And then the opposite. If it's greater than the 12,000, as an absolute, multiply it by the cheaper price. Again, so only the H2 changes. Then your cost is $12.50 there. You autofill across, and all of your calculations are now computed. So the last thing we need to now compute is whether or not we need to make or buy these items. So you simply look at these numbers here, and for all of them, you see that the buy costs are cheaper than the make costs. However, we need to make a formula to determine that. We know they should all be buy. So we're checking two different conditions. We use ifs. So if B7 is greater than H7, then we're going to buy. Because if make costs more than buy, we buy. But then if the opposite is true, we're going to make. Because obviously, if the buy costs more than the make, we make. But then if you autofill down, you'll notice you get these NA errors. That is because instead of going to C7, etc., it went to B8. So we change B8 to C7. We changed H8 to I7. So now it's C7 greater than I7, C7 less than I7. And it should say buy. For the third one, it should now be, instead of B9, D7. And then instead of H9, J7. When you fix that up, buy as well. And then for the last one, the B10s become E7. And the H10 becomes K7. And once you fix that up, they should be buy as well. So the reason we went through that today is because for Excel Homework 3, you're going to be asked to do similar, but related to brownies. So you're going to be asked to compute ingredients using 10 ounces of ingredients. So you would go here, you would change your 30 ounces to 10. You would change your table here, quantity in ounces, to reflect this table here. Notice the percentages of 1 cent. So it's 0.01, not, 13 cents. Keep that in mind. Labor. It takes 30 seconds of labor to make one brownie. Assume labor costs are $12.50 per hour. So you would change this 15 to 12.50. You would change this 15 to 12.50. Right click, format cells, make sure that it has 2 decimals. Otherwise, it will show $13. Instead of this being 60, it would now be 120 because you are making one brownie every 30 seconds, meaning 2 brownies every minute. Then for equipment, you only have an oven and a mixer. So the oven, 13,000, mixer, 17,000, interest rate, 8.5, monthly payments, 12 plus 1, so it's still 13. So you would go back into the assumptions, you would change the interest rate, you would keep this the same, you would get rid of the cooling racks, you'd get rid of the muffin trays, you get rid of these two, and 1,000 here, you change these two prices, and then you would go in and modify this back half of your formula accordingly. You would only have 2 pieces here, the oven and the mixer cost. For the purchase, you would have 25 cents for the first 10,000 brownies and 21 cents for each over 10,000. So instead of doing an ifs like we did here, if it's less than 10,000 or more than 10,000, you're going to have to do a formula. For example, 15,000, the first 10,000 multiplied by that first number, and then the other 5,000 multiplied by the next number. 25,000, the first 10,000 multiplied by the one number, the next 15,000 multiplied by the second. The 50,000, the first 10,000 multiplied by the one number, the next 40,000 multiplied by the second number, and you would add them together. Then for tax, it's referred to here as administration. It says 3 cents per brownie, but a minimum of 1,000. So here we had 7 and a maximum of 1,000. So you would have to do the opposite here. If it is less than 1,000, it's automatically 1,000. And then instead of storage, it's called warehousing and shipping, where it says the rate is, and again, make sure that you notice that it's a part of 1 cent, a part of 2 cents. So it's 0.1.5 cent basically per brownie if you're purchasing over 20,000 brownies. Otherwise, and that is a modification of down here. So you would change that to 20,000, that to the first number, that to the second. And your formula should very much look this. Do not worry about any of this stuff here, about the heading. The only time you'll need to do that is on the midterm. And I will show you guys how to add in the headings like that, if you don't already know, on the midterm review. So the only additional thing that you'll need to do that we didn't just do is to create an average for the make and the buy. And I'll show you how to do that right now. So you would simply type the word average into cell A8, and then in cell E8, type equals average, open parenthesis, highlight your range of totals for the make, close parenthesis, enter. You now have your average for the make, and then go over to K8 equals average, highlight the totals for the buy, close parenthesis. Oops, what did I do here? We want H7 through K7, close parenthesis. And now you have the average for your buy costs. So when you're doing that homework, you're basically asked to create your own file. But again, you could make a copy of the muffins version. And like I said, go in and just change up the assumptions. For the most part, like I said, you're going to modify the equipment formula because you have basically just going to have this part, the oven and the mixer costs. Your tax function is going to be switched a little because you're going to have the minimum of 1,000 instead of the maximum of 1,000. And your storage and purchase price, as well as the ingredients and labor, are going to require you to change your assumptions as well. Like I said, might take you a little longer than the first two assignments. That's why I went over it today. In case there's any questions, you guys can ask today. Email me, ask on Wednesday. Entirely up to you guys. So are there any questions on that or VLOOKUP? No? Okay, then enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see everybody on Wednesday.